Good morning, everybody. Afternoon to those joining us from the East Coast. We're excited to have you guys here. Austin Peterson, Landon Mance with Backbone Planning. We've got special guests with us, Jed Morris. We've got Luke Bunnell, and Brian Shields is going to join us in a little bit. So we're excited to host this webinar, second of a series of webinars that we're putting out there for small businesses. If you haven't joined one of our webinars or you haven't listened to our podcast, we believe that the backbone of the American economy is the small business owner. That's why we put this content out there. It's important. Everybody needs support in the small business world. And so today we're excited to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of buying your first small or medium-sized business. So Landon, you want to kick us off, talk a little bit or jump in on the good side of buying a business?
Yeah. So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, I guess, by 3 minutes to some of y'all on the East Coast. Let me go to the next slide here. We're still getting these presentations down pat since our last one was a little bit chaotic as we had a bunch of internet issues. So as Austin said, we've got 4 or 5 of us on the kind of informal panel today. I invited one of my business partners, Luke, to join, and then our other partner, Brian, to join as well. I don't see him quite here yet, but we've got a bunch of dudes on here that love small business, that have some really good and unique experiences in small business, buying, selling, operating, investing in SMBs. So a lot of good experience to draw on here. I'm Landon Mance. We'll do a really quick intro, just me, Austin, and Jed, and then we'll dive right into it. So Austin and I own a company together called Backbone Planning Partners. We are a small business consultancy and a wealth management firm, specifically catered to working with small and medium-sized business owners. We have a lot of stuff that we do on the personal side of things. We have a lot of stuff that we do on the business side of things. And one of the things that we do on the business side is advising our clients to build better, more transferable businesses. We also help them to look at and acquire other businesses as they are looking to grow via acquisition. So Jed, let me kick it over to you. Just take 30 seconds or a minute, if you would, and just introduce yourself with some quick background. And then Austin, you can close us out and we'll get into things.
Sure. Thanks, Lance. Jed Morris. I'm a 10-year Air Force veteran. After getting out in 2019, did my MBA at NYU before ETA was cool there, but somehow, caught the attention of the market as it was really boosting at the time. Kind of dove down the rabbit hole, went to the conferences at Harvard and Chicago, realized a self-funded search was the way I wanted to go. So I pivoted out of big tech and bought a couple landscaping companies in Southern California. That went well until it didn't. And we went insolvent earlier this year, had to close that up, and then pivoted my firm into an independent sponsor firm, doing some consulting for business owners on the side. So since then, I've been networking with other searchers who have had not so positive outcomes in an effort to get better lessons learned out there for, the people that, haven't been in that operator seat.
Yeah, look forward to hearing what you have to say, Jed, because I think that there's a lot on the internet today about how it's an awesome way to jump into the business world, right? Just go out and buy something and everything will be great and you'll have a great income and everything will be just rosy. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say there. Landon kind of laid out who we are as a firm. Personally, I've been married 26 years. Excuse me. I love to play golf. I'm not very good at it, but I love to play it. I have 2 kids, 24 and 21, boy and a girl. The 24-year-old's married and in the professional world and doing well and doing the things that he wants to do. And the 21-year-old is kind of still learning some lessons and finishing up some hair school and trying to figure out exactly who she wants to be and what she wants to be as she grows up. But that's part of being in your early 20s. So we kind of, are here to support her and do everything that we can. But for those of you who are listening and have teenagers that think raising teenagers is really, really hard, I'm here to tell you it gets harder as they're adults. So I'm sorry to spoil that for you, to feel like you're free when they get to be adults, but unfortunately that's not the case. But I've been doing this for 25 years. My parents, my dad was a small business owner. My grandfather was a farmer. I think that the backbone of this country are those types of people. And so that's kind of how I got into this. And Landon and I became business partners several years ago, because Landon was hoping to have somebody that was better looking than him, but bald. So it kind of evened things out. So that's how we got connected.
Yeah, right on. So just before we get into it, I want to take just a second here and just acknowledge Jed in two ways here. One, Jed, thank you very much for your service to this country. Very much appreciated, man. Second of all, what's really cool about Jed is that Jed has kind of become this like advocate for, people that are trying to go out and buy businesses. And in doing so, he's telling it how it is. He's exposing people to the real true risks that you encounter when you buy a business, from pretty much every facet that you can imagine. There's a lot of gurus out there talking about, doing this, doing that, no money down, all these strategies that are possible, when you buy a business, but they are generally not conducive to being successful post acquisition. So Jed's got some really phenomenal insights. It's not every day that you get somebody that is willing to come on and speak to a live audience about, the challenges that he had in his acquisition, and he's doing it in the spirit of just trying to help other people to avoid the pitfalls and make some of the mistakes that he's made. So, Jed, just thank you for being willing to do this, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lance. I appreciate that. This was definitely not part of the plan. The plan was to buy businesses and keep building those and build an empire, right? But life doesn't turn out that way sometimes. And after I acquired two businesses, and after they went insolvent earlier this year, I kind of crawled into a hole for a couple months, trying to figure out, what's the next step. And then as I started emerging from that, I realized personally that, I spent a ridiculous amount of money learning some incredible lessons. And it would be a shame if I didn't move forward with those. And so that's how I pivoted into the independent sponsor business consulting kind of space. But then at the same time, I kind of reemerged on LinkedIn, and you're right. Everything you see out there is buy a business and all your problems are solved. You'll be a millionaire in 3 to 5 years, freedom, all that kind of stuff. And there's an element of truth to that. And that's a good thing, because we need more small business owners out there. But the problem I kept running into is I see these gurus just posting all the same stuff you talked about: 100% seller financing, no money down, no credit required, work, get that sweat equity, all that other stuff. And there was never a mention of a personal guarantee. And as someone who's been on the opposite side of a personal guarantee, it will wreck your life. And so I just started talking about that, and then reaching out to other searchers who had negative experiences. And a lot of times it's just from market wins. Things happen when you're in that operator seat that you can't control. And getting as many of those lessons learned as possible, and just getting them out there so people can, make a real risk assessment about what they're getting themselves into. And then more often than not, say, hey, once you get in that operator seat, life's a lot different when you're an operator than it is when you're searching. And you need to be paying attention to things like the cash flow conversion cycle and all these other things that are going to hit you in the face. And the more we can get that information out there, the more successful the operators are going to be once they take over that business.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many ways, hundreds of ways that these sellers manipulate different areas of the business when they are looking to sell it, or they're in the process of selling it. So we'll dive into some of those. And as Jed, we are in the process of investing a fund, and so we are looking at businesses daily right now. And just some of the stuff you see, it's unbelievable. So we'll talk about some of that stuff. All right.
It's wild. It's wild. And I know we're going to get into it, but the craziest thing is, like, when you're not from the space, you think that what you're handed is truth. You think a P&L is a P&L. How could you fudge those numbers? It wasn't before I took a class in accounting, I thought accounting was just what it is. It's the numbers. And then you realize it's all bullshit in a lot of ways.
Yeah, indeed. All right. So just one more word to the audience here. I don't think we've got a ton of people on here, but we've got some. And certainly the whole point of this is to have this be informative, interactive, educational and valuable to the people that are listening to this live. Obviously, they've got the opportunity to engage and ask questions, and we encourage that. So as we're going along this presentation, drop a note in the, I think it's going to be the chat, or it might be the Q&A function, but y'all are smart enough to figure it out. So if you got a question, an insight, a comment, a rebuttal, challenge something that we're saying, we are all for it. So drop it in the chat, because we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So all right.
Just one more thing to add there, Landon. If you are listening to this as a recording afterwards, because we will be making it available, you can certainly reach out to us directly with any questions that you may have.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. So let's talk about the good. I'll kick this off, guys. Jump in, obviously, with any sporting thoughts or comments. So buying versus starting from scratch. The only business that I've started from scratch, per se, is going to be the business that Austin and I own, which is our wealth management firm. And it was kind of unique because I had my practice, Austin had his practice, and then we had some clients that we served together before we formally, merged our businesses together about a year and a half ago. And so, I started my financial planning business from scratch. I left, a big bank and, started my independent practice back in September of 2015. I try to never say never with things, because I've learned my lessons many times doing that. But I can pretty confidently say I will never start a business from scratch again in my life. After, buying, a business, I just don't think that I'll ever go back to that. So we'll kind of talk about, some of the, advantages, right? All right. So really the whole point of buying a business versus starting a business is that you've got an established customer base, right? Now, there's different business models. Some you've got recurring revenue, some you've got recurring revenue, you've got project-based revenue. Sometimes there's, kind of a hybrid between the two of them. That's kind of the case in the tree business that we bought last year. We don't have any recurring revenue, but we've got a lot of reoccurring revenue from repeat customers that come back to us, yearly, or sometimes multiple different times in the year, because they're a property manager or they oversee a bunch of HOAs and they're regularly, sending us business. But, the whole point of buying an existing business is that you've got reputation, you've got, recurring or repeat or reoccurring customers. You've got a database of information that you can draw on to market to those customers. But that is certainly one of the biggest advantages. Now, this might be, up for debate a bit, because if you're buying small, and my kind of definition of buying small would be, I don't know, like anything less than 500,000 of SDE or profit, or EBITDA. Generally, there's not going to be a whole lot of infrastructure in place, but at least there is something there to build off of. All right, brand recognition. Personally, the businesses that I like are businesses that have been around for a minimum of 10 years. I feel like that 10-year mark kind of solidifies that, you're a legitimate, operation. Hopefully you've been racking up, reviews. You've given people a long enough kind of runway and timeline to really understand that, like, you do have staying power, right? And I feel like 10 years is a really good benchmark to be able to have some kind of brand recognition. But at the same time, in the businesses that we're all kind of looking at, people aren't going to necessarily like know your brand, right? We're not a Nike, we're not a Coca-Cola, we're not an Amazon. We aren't doing things and putting things out into the world there that are building our brand reputation. Usually what we're doing is we're doing marketing, advertising efforts that is generally focused on one thing, and that is to generate activity and interest in your product or your service so that people will come to you and they will hire you or engage with you for whatever it is that you're offering. Jed or Austin, anything you guys want to add there?
Well, I think you definitely nailed the key concepts of why so many people are interested in buy then build, right? For me, it all sums up into two things. One, product market fit. That's the difference between buying a business and starting one from scratch. Any of us who have tried that start from scratch, we know that, before you build anything, you got to get out there and, test with the market as much as possible. Hey, do you like this? Do you like this concept? Do you want to buy it? And then you don't have proof until people actually pay you money. And so that is a very, very difficult struggle. And then even when you're successful, going from 0 to 1 and scaling is a whole different animal. And so finding product market fit is really, really critical. But the second thing that you're buying is time. So anybody can show up and with a little bit of money start a tree trimming business or an irrigation business or a landscaping company or an HVAC company. But now they're competing against all the competitors in their area. They don't have the brand, excuse me. They don't have the brand recognition. They don't have the customers in place. So what you're really buying with all this stuff you've mentioned already is time. You're buying that time back, the 10, 12, 20 years that seller has already been in the market. You're taking advantage of all the hard work they put in place so that, you're starting off, with a significant leg up and you can move forward as opposed to building all those relationships from scratch.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, maybe it's because I'm the one who's going to be talking about the common challenges or the bad of buying a business that I kind of think this way. But I'm actually a little bit surprised to hear Landon say that he would never. I mean, he said never say never, but he would never start a business again from scratch because there are some advantages to starting from scratch, right? And so, I mean, we're not going to get into it a whole lot, but the reality is some of the negatives of the unknowns inside of a business don't exist if you're starting from scratch. You control everything from the get-go, the way that you're going to set it up, the way that you're going to build the brand that you're going to use, like all of those kinds of things, you're controlling from the get-go and not having to wonder if it really matters, right? Because here's the reality. Landon and I have a brand that gets massive positive response, right? People love the name, they love what we stand for, they, all of that kind of stuff. I don't walk around even my own town and get recognized as, oh, you're one of the co-founders of Backbone Planning Partners. How's it going? Like that doesn't happen, right? Like a small business brand for the most part does not matter. So I just don't know that's a reason to buy versus starting from scratch. But not to rain on the parade there because it does matter to a certain extent, but it's just not as beneficial as an Amazon or a Coke, like Landon mentioned.
Yeah, good points for sure. And I don't know what the statistic is, maybe one of you guys know it, but isn't it like 95 or 90 or 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years or something like that? And I don't know what the stat is, but I know it's up there. I think it's 90+% of businesses that are started from scratch end up shutting down within the first 5 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's quite accurate. And it's kind of the reverse for SBA backed acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's interesting. And to expand on what Austin was saying, I did a couple small startup ventures before I bought my first business, and they failed miserably. I'd never launched a company before, but it wasn't until after I bought my own businesses where I actually was in the operator seat, seeing how it was actually running, where I realized, yeah, next time maybe I will start my own business for a couple of things we're going to talk about later. But culture fit is so important. Yeah, I think it's the one thing that's overlooked the most from ETA acquirers is understanding that a small business is the direct reflection of its owner in every single way. If that owner is a great salesman and a terrible accountant, then revenue is going to be looking pretty good, but the books are going to look pretty terrible. But that's so true when it comes to the culture. If that person has a positive culture and positive relationships, it's reflected in the employees that they hire and the business that they're doing in their community. And the opposite is also true. And turning the ship of culture after you've acquired it is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And like you said, in the small business world, like the company that you are buying in every way, shape, form you can possibly imagine, they are direct reflections of the owner, of their personal values, of the way that they view the world. If they they hate the government and they want to pay as little in taxes as possible, like all of these things, like the way that they think and they feel and that they interact, like they're all reflections of how they run their business. And so when there's that misalignment in values from a buyer to a seller, that creates a ton of challenges. And sometimes I think they're insurmountable, because on the front end, as you look at a business and you really like what you see, and then you get into the meat and the potatoes, and you put an LOI out there and it's accepted, and you move into diligence and you start to peel back these layers of the onion. You're just like, just as you get more and more exposure into the inner workings of businesses, you're just like, oh my gosh, like this is just so not what I thought it was going to be on the surface. But faster ROI potential. I think that is going to be true in most cases. I do think that when you are buying a long-standing, kind of enduringly profitable business that's been around for over 10 years, it's gone through some of the cycles of the economy. I do think that is a real thing in a lot of small business acquisitions, the faster ROI potential. Now, that being said, the next bullet point says opportunities for growth. You will hear this in essentially every business that you are looking at to acquire. The sellers of the business, they've got this growth plan for the business. There's all these great opportunities to take the business to the next level. And it's always like, well, why have you never pulled any of these levers, right? Now, that being said, sometimes, and I've seen this with the first tree business that I bought, and we're actually under contract right now to buy a second business, and it is the same theme for both of these. But there is a point where owner operators that have been running businesses for 10, 20, 30 plus years, they do get to a point where they don't want to grow. They don't want to grow. They're making a great living. They're comfortable with the amount of time and effort and energy that they're putting into the business. And they do not want to take the business to the next level. They don't want to invest more monies back into the business. They don't want to buy new vehicles. They don't want to hire any additional people. They're good with where they're at. So that is absolutely the case sometimes, but you just have to be really weary of the sellers of SMBs when they say that, oh yeah, it's real easy. You just dump more money into your marketing and you can scale this thing to these levels. And it's like, No. That's not how it works. It's not that easy. Growth is really, really hard, especially when you have a massive, principal and interest payment that you're paying to the SBA every month. So growth is really hard and challenging. So just be weary of the sellers that are, putting that out there as, really easy path to grow the business, because it's not easy. All right.
Yeah, that actually reminds me, you can go to the next slide if you're ready, but it actually reminds me of a quasi transaction, really an advisor that I was trying to bring on to my practice way back in the day. I mean, we're talking very early 2000s, maybe 2001 ish. And so again, this is a long time ago, but the advisor was making $75,000 a year. And we're talking about, what it would look like, and if he joins our practice, and would we give him some cash on the way in, and what does his growth plan look like? And he lays out this whole plan, and he says, well, next year I'll do 175, and then the following year I'll do 230. And he puts out this whole plan, and I said, how are you going to get from 75 to 175? And it's important to know that this advisor had been in the business for about 15 years at this point, right? And he said, well, when I will something to happen, it happens. And I said, well, why haven't you willed it to do that before then? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, right? Because this particular advisor was struggling to put enough food on the table for his family. This was Southern California. And even back in the early 2000s, $75,000 a year didn't go that far in Southern California when you have a few kids, right? And so, Landon's absolutely right. Like they want to put out this rosy story. It's real easy. All you have to do is, but to Landon's point, the question is, why haven't you done that? And trust me, Landon's right as well when he says sometimes small business owners don't want to grow beyond a certain level. Like Landon and I have had that conversation about our own practice, right? And there is some value to, well, we're making good money, we're having an impact, we're serving the type of people that we want to serve, we're serving the number of people we want to serve, we're good, right? We're comfortable with the value, we're comfortable with our growth plans, we're not going to do anything different. Like that is very, very true. But a lot of the things that have just been laid out are exactly why most small businesses never transact. And it's because they're heavily reliant on the owner and the way that they do things, the culture that they put out, the accounting, the financials, everything. If they're responsible 100% for the sales and all the relationships are with that owner, how in the world is that business to be transferred to somebody else? Right? Like I may be a great salesperson, Jed may be a great salesperson, Landon may be a great salesperson, but that doesn't mean that you can step into that owner's role and maintain those relationships and grow sales the same way that they did for the past decade or more.
Yeah, so much good stuff right there, Austin. Just to start off, I searched for almost 2 years, and I've seen hundreds and hundreds of sims. I don't think I ever saw a single sim that said there wasn't an outsized opportunity to grow the business 20-30% over the next 3 years. It just doesn't exist. Everyone says that their business is an easy growth. We've done zero marketing until now. You could do marketing. We've done zero proprietary outreach. You could do that proprietary outreach. There's always that extra step. And the question always comes up, well, why didn't you? And I've never seen a small business owner say no to money. And so it's not as simple as saying, oh, they just don't want the money. It's because it's difficult. It's hard. You're going to have to implement a CRM in your business when you never have. You're going to have to actually hire salespeople if you're the owner and you're the primary salesperson. And then not just hire them, you have to train them. You're going to expect them to fail over and over and over. And when it doesn't work, you're going to have to hire another one. And you're going to have to try Facebook ads. And you're going to spend thousands of dollars and you're not going to get a lead. And you have to trust that you can figure it out as opposed to just taking your leads from Yelp. So it's a process to grow. It's difficult to grow. It's expensive to grow. And like you said, the vast majority of small business owners, they're not interested in that kind of growth. They're in, if you look at the actual growth rate for most small businesses, it's in line with the overall economy. They're just doing what they've done already, and then they're growing organically from there, through word of mouth and just with the overall economy, depending on the industry that they're in. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you meet a small business owner who's been operating for 30 years and when all their work is done, they're coming home with $750,000 in cash in the bank, who am I to tell them that they need to grow? They're doing fine, So it really does come down to the owner operator understanding what their values are, understanding that growth is possible but difficult, and having a sober conversation of that key man risk. And we'll get to that. But what happens when that owner steps away and you truly have to fit in all the different roles and responsibilities that that person, and usually their spouse at the same time, who was probably unpaid on the payroll, is also taking care of a lot of those heavy lift opportunities in the business that you now have to be responsible for without the privilege and understanding of all the work they've done over the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
Great points. Well, we've kind of already leaned towards the bad. So you want to actually go to the next slide and we'll talk about the bad, some different challenges that maybe we haven't mentioned.
Yep.
All right. So, first thing that comes to mind is financial commitments and debt, right? Jed kind of said this at the top of the hour. He talked a little bit about how there's all this stuff out there on LinkedIn, Facebook, all the different gurus, or maybe it was Landon that mentioned it. You can buy a business, no money down, and you're going to make gobs of money, right? And there are opportunities to buy a business with no money down. But I will tell you that from my experience, and again, you can see the gray hair on my face. I'm not claiming to be an expert in every area of this, right? But I have bought, I have built, I have sold, I have closed, I have done all of the things that we're talking about here over my career. And, to Jed's story that we're going to get into here in just a little bit, which I can't wait to get into. You learn way more from the failures than you do from the successes anyway, right? So it's you don't truly fail until you stop trying. But here's the deal. When you're buying a business and they are saying that you can buy it with no money down, or you're negotiating an opportunity to buy a business with no money down, it's typically because the owner is trying to figure out a way to make a transaction happen. Mm-hmm. Right? They don't have any other way of making a transaction happen rather than saying, well, yeah, I'll do a 100% seller finance deal here.
Yeah.
Right. And it goes back to some of the things that I mentioned earlier. It's typically because the business is the owner. It's all about the owner and what they're bringing to the table. And so because they haven't put systems in place, because they haven't put a management team in place, because they haven't done any of these things that you kind of need to step into a business and feel way more confident it's going to be successful long-term, that's why they're willing to do these owner financed or 100% finance deals, because the broker that they're working with, and just to be clear, it's always a broker on that type of a deal. It's never an investment banker. It's never a larger firm. It's a broker because it's a small deal. And they have told them, this is the only way we're going to be able to have a transaction happen with your business. I hate to say it that way, but that is absolutely the truth. If it's no money down, it's because there's a lot of hair on that deal, no matter what.
Yeah, just to double click on that, there are only, in my opinion, two rational reasons a seller of a business would sell with 100% seller financing. And just to be clear, seller financing, especially in the lower middle market, is common. Anywhere from 20 to 25% happens all the time.
Yep.
And that's a good thing. But when it comes to 100% seller financing, there's only two reasons. One, you have a close, intimate relationship with the seller. You are the seller's child. You are their longtime employee. You are their close friend. And in that situation, they've already built up a huge amount of trust with you. They understand your competence in running the business, because when you do 100% seller financing, you're taking on the risk of the bank. And while there is an advantage when it comes to a tax perspective, the bigger risk is that you're not a bank. You don't have a bunch of these extra loans going out there. You're not expecting a dead capital commitment, because if the buyer doesn't fulfill their obligations to make payments on that seller financing, sure, you can take back the business, but your asset is most likely destroyed at that point. it's most likely gone. This is not real estate. There's no house or property left over that you can then salvage. And even the hard assets of the business are generally minuscule in response to the actual amount that you're actually going to sell the business. So the first and only reason why a seller would do it is a close relationship. And the second reason is exactly what Austin talked to, which is the business is not bankable. It's not it would not qualify for commercial debt, whether through the SBA or any other fashion. And when that happens, there is only one outcome, and that is seller financing or liquidation. And what we don't talk about is the vast majority of small businesses in America, well over 90%, will never sell. And that's okay. They probably shouldn't sell. They're an owner-operated contracting team. It's not truly a business, you know? So and that's fine. But if you're just understand that when you're in a position to have 100% seller financing, one of those two scenarios is working for you or against you. And you have to understand, do you really have that relationship with the seller? Are you really that special? And if that's the case, it can be good. But more often than not, in the vast majority of cases, you are in a business that is not bankable. And if you're not sure, just take that deal to your local SBA lender and see if they'd even consider it. You don't have to do it. Just see if they consider it. And if they would not consider it with the full faith backing of the federal government, then you should run for the hills.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, great thoughts there. So only other thing I'd add on the financial commitment side is if you're truly wanting to do this, ETH style business acquisition, go out there and buy something and build it and whatever, it's a great way to do things. I want to be very clear there, but you should expect that if you want a high confidence in being successful in the acquisition that you make, you should expect to put 10% down. That's just at a minimum. And so think about it. If you're buying a business for $2 million, that's 200,000 that you've got to have in liquid dollars to be able to put down, and you're going to personally guarantee the loan, right? So you just got to be aware of what that means and the things to be concerned about, so to speak. Yeah, go ahead, Len.
I was just going to add something there. So yeah, usually when you're using the SBA to buy a small business, they're going to generally require some kind of 10% equity injection. Now, you can get a little bit creative in how you do that, but generally you're going to need to bring that money to the table, 10% minimum. Personally, I think that when people, especially if you're buying your first business, I think you should bring quite a bit more than 10%. If you can bring 15, 20, even 30%, the more that you can bring to the table, the bigger that your cushion is, so that, as the next bullet point says, unexpected expenses arise, which they will arise. To what degree they arise to, that is going to be subject to your business, but they will arise. And just to give a little bit of color around that, Brian Shields, who's my partner, Austin and I's partner on the fund that we have spun up and are starting to invest. Between Brian and I, we have bought several businesses. Brian was a private equity, principal for, a long time. So he's made dozens of acquisitions through his PE experience. He also worked for a venture-backed startup and led growth, and they made a bunch of acquisitions there. And then he's bought businesses personally. And even after all the combined acquisitions that Austin, Brian, and I have done, Brian and I are using all equity on the businesses that we are going to be going out and buying to significantly reduce the SMB acquisition risk. So, these are coming from guys that have been doing this for many, many, many years and have done a lot of transactions. We're going to go out and invest money on behalf of our investors into businesses, and we're going to use all equity. We're going to use zero debt on the acquisitions. And that is because there's just such a high degree of risk and uncertainty around these things that we're talking about when we make an acquisition. And certainly unexpected expenses is a very big part of that.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Landon. And not to belabor it too much, but one of the questions I get a lot when I talk to new searchers is, do I do a search fund or do I do self-funded search? And the ones who end up picking self-funded search, they do it for one of two reasons. One, because they like the ownership aspect, and two, because of the higher leverage. And we have to remind everyone that when we're talking about buying a business, we're talking about a leveraged buyout. Leverage. You're using bank debt to buy a business. So when you're looking at EBITDA or SDE, that's not yours. That is a factor of how much debt you're putting on the business. And so once you buy, that cash first and foremost goes to pay the debt, and whatever's left is what you get to do operations and invest in the business. So you may not even have the cash to invest in the business once you're covering basic operations. So that's important to keep in mind. And when you're looking at a business, like in the beginning, I was this way. I was like, oh, I'm going to do 90-10, 90% leverage, 10% equity injection. But it's so easy to get caught in a place where you have very, very little cushion. And now looking back, I'm like, look, if I could buy a business, especially the SBA level, when you're on the lower end, if you're at 5 million of transaction value and below, especially when you're in that range, find a good deal. Make sure your debt service coverage ratio is somewhere above 1.5, ideally 1.8 or 2. And you can get there even if you don't have the equity to bring, because there are equity partners out there who will give you some cash for a minority stake. As long as you still own 51% or more of the business, especially if like you're around the 65% area, you own it. It's yours. They can't tell you what to do. And so you're not giving up control. You're giving up a little piece of the pie to have a lot more cushion when it comes to controlling the outcome of that business, because headwinds are coming and they will hit you. And especially if you're in a capital intensive business like landscaping or HVAC, somewhere that has a lot of trucks, a lot of vans, a lot of people, you need to be prepared for when those headwinds hit you and you've got the cash to absorb that kind of impact.
Yeah, I mean, all great points. And I think the biggest thing is you delineated the fact or the difference between 10% down for the financing. And, because Landon said, bring more cash than that, right? Well, yeah, you should have a cushion for operating capital, unexpected legal expenses, all kinds of stuff that's going to come up. And then additional capital that you may need to fund the growth options that you're looking at and everything that that you're trying to do to make sure that that ratio is higher, so that not only can you service the debt and fund your growth plans, but you can also put some money in your pocket along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. The business is worthless if it goes insolvent. So you may own 95% of the business, but if it goes insolvent, you've lost it all. So I'd rather have a little bit more people in and give them up a little bit more equity to make sure I've got a lot of cash on the balance sheet, and we'll get to working capital. But I'd rather be in that scenario knowing that I'm prepared for the worst than, lever myself up to the top and just hope for the best, because hope is not a strategy.
Yeah. All right.
A good rule of thumb, just one closing point on that. Good rule of thumb: if you buy a business with 10% down and you use 90% debt or leverage on the deal, a good rule of thumb is 50% of the profit of the business is going to go towards your debt payments. So if the business does $500,000 of SDE or EBITDA or profit, then you can essentially pencil out that about $250,000 will be wiped out overnight, going to principal and interest payments on your SBA loan. So that's a good starting point. And then of course you got to reduce what you're going to pay yourself. You got to allocate some money for growth. You got to leave money for unexpected expenses, taxes, all these things. And so all of a sudden, a business that does $500,000, the day after you acquire it, that could go down to zero, 50,000, maybe 100,000. So you gotta keep that in mind as you look at the financial performance of the business before you buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move through these next few points rather quickly, because I want to get over to Jed's story and just kind of have him lay out, the things that he went through. But operational challenges, you're going to inherit inefficiencies or outdated processes that need immediate attention that you just did not anticipate at all. And so you got to be prepared for that. Doing ride-alongs and all these kinds of things may show you some things, but you're not going to catch everything during the due diligence period. So you got to be expecting that. Managing employee expectations. I mean, Jed talked about culture, right? Your leadership style can cause disruptions. The way that you handle yourself, the way that you want to have things go, or the way that employees expect to be compensated in order to be retained, like all these types of things that can come into play that you just don't think about, and can actually really cause problems in the first, year or two of the deal. Anything to add before we jump to the next point of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm over here smiling because that's a big one too. You hear a ton of stories. People acquire a business, and the day after close, and you're the head honcho and sitting in the corner office, and the person you're in charge. Well, all of a sudden, people start knocking at your door and saying, "Hey, Bob and Sally, they told me that I was getting a raise this year. They promised us big bonuses at the end of this year. So just want to make sure you guys are going to be fulfilling all those promises, So that happens quite a bit. We're running into a scenario right now in the acquisition, the second tree business that we are acquiring, where we've got guys that are doing the identical work in our company that are doing in the company that we're looking to acquire, and there's a big discrepancy in pay. So they're making more or less in certain areas, and we're gonna have to work with the sellers to try to reconcile that, because if you start messing with people's pay right after you make an acquisition, that is a recipe for disaster, because people do not like that at all. First of all, a lot of people don't like change, certainly don't like change to the way that they are getting paid, especially if it is not in their favor. People are happy to accept raises on day one, but if you start messing with their pay in the opposite direction, good luck to you, because that is going to create some immediate strife, and that's not the foot that you want to get off on.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but when you look at this list, financial commitments, debt, expenses, challenges, these are the things that new searchers look at when they're evaluating a business. They're like, all right, well, can I support the debt? What do my expenses look like? Does this financially make sense? And they're making their own decisions about that. Whereas culture and employee relations are almost left on the back burner, if discussed at all. And after being in that seat, I can tell you that employee relations and just culture overall is probably the most important thing, like right at the top. And the reason being is because those employees and the culture of that business, again, direct reflection of the owner. The owner hired those people. The owner has created a structure of incentives and how we do the work here that they have decided, that those employees have decided to go along with, for good or bad. And so when you're taking over, you're looking at, okay, which of my employees are key employees? Well, if you're stepping into a bad culture or a toxic work environment, that bad employee, they may have you over a barrel. They may have you in a place where, well, I'm going to demand this specific raise, or you can't fire me because of XYZ impact to revenue, or I'll take these teams with me. And so you need to be aware of the situation that you're stepping into as much as you can as the buyer, and you'll never really know until you're there. But understanding that the culture is so important. And after being in the seat myself, I'm of the firm belief that the reason why large consultancies talk about why M&A in the corporate space is largely ineffective at achieving these synergies that they're looking for, it's the culture fit. It's because you're trying to merge two companies that may be doing the exact same thing, but they do it in very different ways. They compensate their employees in different ways. They promote them in different ways. They treat them in different ways. And when you're trying to merge those two cultures together, one of them has to win. And you have to take a leadership position in deciding what the culture of your business is going to be, and rooting out to the core everything that doesn't fit that culture. And sometimes that means getting rid of a key employee. Sometimes that means taking a significant hit to revenue if maybe one of your top 10% of customers just are not fitting the bill with the way you want to do business. And so these are incredibly important things that have outsized impact on your ability to be successful post-acquisition that we most discuss.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, it can literally be as simple as, I've worked for these guys for 10 years. They know the tree trimming business inside and out, and you're coming in with zero experience. You've never climbed a tree. You've never held a chainsaw 40 feet up. Like just that perception from the outset, right? Like, who's this guy or gal coming in to buy this business that knows nothing about what we do? That is sometimes enough for the employees to be disgruntled and think, well, this is crazy. I'm not working for this person. No way. So yeah, there's just a lot of things to think about. That speaks right to team dynamics, right? I mean, obviously their perception of you coming in and becoming part of the team, but then what do you know about the teams the way that they are? What about the, you can go to the next bullet point there, Landon. What about the financial risks, right? We hit on that a little bit, the potential legal or compliance hurdles, right? Like here's one thing that Landon, this is Landon's example, but I'm going to tell it is, he bought this tree trimming business. They've got these bucket trucks, right? And they're right at the weight level of CDL or not CDL. But what he didn't think about is it's right there, it's below the CDL limit, but as soon as they put one branch on there or one limb or one stump or whatever, it's over the limit and it requires a CDL license to drive it. Right? That's compliance risk that you don't think about. If you don't understand that business fully, you don't think about your liability risks, your compliance risks, whether or not you've got to register with the Department of Transportation. For us, it's the SEC. Like there's so many different things that you may or may not think about, and you don't even know the questions to ask. Mm-hmm. That's the concern, right? You don't even know what you need to be asking because you don't have that experience. Looks like Brian wants to raise his hand on something.
I do. Hey, guys.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian.
What's up, Brian?
So just for the recording and everybody's context, I'm partnered with Landon and Austin on the fund to acquire businesses. And I just really wanted to piggyback the point that Austin made. One of the things that I talk a lot about to people thinking about acquiring a business is the importance of the buyer and the business fit. And I cannot stress the point Austin made enough that it is so much more difficult for someone to step into a business that they know literally nothing about and have a quick success. In fact, it's easier to have quick failures because of things like, oh, if we put one branch on the truck, this is now a commercial vehicle instead of a traditional vehicle. Or like the last business I acquired was a HOA management business. And it's very easy to step in there and say, oh, hey, I understand project management. And so I can get things done, but you don't know anything about the laws or the financial responsibilities you have, et cetera. And so that can lead you to a lot of quick failures out of the gate. And I think the most important thing with having a good buyer and business fit is your ability to move and pivot with the market through intuition, right? Like you're not going to have a McKinsey study that tells you, oh, cool, well, the market is moving 15% in this direction, or buyers are pulling their budgets back 20%, and so we should change pricing or think about the cost basis of our product. You kind of got to have a feel for it, and it takes time to develop that. So I always push people on thinking about the industries and the businesses they're targeting and really hone in on what do you know? If everybody quit tomorrow, because as I think Jed and Austin have been hitting on, and Landon in on, like the employees might feel differently about you, or they might have gotten used to being compensated in a certain way, et cetera. If you need to hire a bunch of people to replace them, can you do it? Are you able to see what's coming around the corner in the industry if things go like they did with COVID pretty quickly? Like, are you able to make those kind of decisions from your gut with the pace of the market? And that's hard. So that sets a different bar, at least in my mind, of the types of businesses for people to acquire and they can be successful in.
Yeah, great points, Brian. Thanks for raising your hand and piping in there. So I want to make sure we leave some time for Jed. I know we've covered some of the things that Jed kind of dealt with his acquisition, but Jed, why don't you just kind of cover the ugly of acquisitions and kind of what you've dealt with over the last few years here?
Yeah, a little bit of context here. So I did almost a 2-year search, self-funded search, and then acquired 2 landscaping companies in Southern California. Operated those for just about 8 months until we went insolvent. And so I'm going to walk through some of the things that I experienced, as well as some of the things that others have experienced. And this brings me back to what I said in the very beginning. There are two reasons that I've seen why people don't discuss the negatives of buying a business. One, because it sucks to fail. And most of us are not going to talk about our failures until we've got some outsized success to where we can look back and be like, oh, I had a few businesses fail back in the day, but now I'm successful. So no one wants to talk about the failure in real time. And I completely understand that. But the second reason is because in small business acquisition failures, there's usually some sort of litigation at the end. Someone's upset. And as a result, the vast majority of people who do have a negative outcome, they've signed some sort of settlement that puts them in a position where they're not allowed to talk about it. And so just in the past 2 months, I've talked with well over 15 people who have either, failed at a self-funded search or a search fund and they've got a settlement in place where they can't talk about the details. I'm also one of those people. So I'm going to discuss a lot of things that small businesses run into, including the issues I ran into, and hopefully that's very helpful. So first and foremost, due diligence, incredibly important. Everybody understands that. But there are a couple things that you need to understand with due diligence. First, you're not going to find everything. It's just not possible. A couple weeks ago, I had a live call with Joe Odell, who ran a search fund and bought a $20 million business that was doing $3.5 million of EBITDA. And he had professional investors. He did quality of earnings checks. He did all the stuff that all of us self-funded guys are not going to have the money to do. And there were issues with the business that he did not discover until he was in the seat. And that is just a telltale sign for the fact that as a buyer, you will never know as much about the business as the seller does. You just won't. And the seller has been operating in that business for decades, most likely. And as a result, they have ways to hide things from you if they don't want you to find out. And so that is why the very first piece of advice I give everybody when they're looking to acquire, especially for the first time, is you need to have a good relationship with the seller. And that doesn't mean you're buddies. That doesn't mean you're going out for beers. What it does mean is that, as I discussed about how the business is a direct reflection of the owner, if that owner doesn't have integrity, run for the hills. If you ever feel like that owner is hiding something from you, you need to leave. If you ever feel like they're being dishonest in any way, then you need to leave. The reason being is because how they do one thing is how they're going to do everything. And of the 15, 16 people I've talked to in the last few weeks, the number one issue that people run into is fraud. It's seller misalignment. And I already know what people are going to say. You can protect yourself in the purchase agreement. You can protect yourself with securities and warranties. You can protect yourself with all these other legal mechanisms. And the first thing I would remind you of is, while that's true, it requires litigation. You have to sue somebody. And in the meantime, you're still operating a business that might be materially impacted by the misalignment that was caused between you and the seller. And so that business may go out of business before you ever get a settlement in place. And you may not win that settlement to begin with. And even if you do, it's going to cost you a lot of money to get there. So, you need to remember that protecting yourself legally is only one step of a very, very long process. So first and foremost, alignment with the seller is key. There are 29 million small businesses in America, and you should do business with an owner of someone that you can at least trust is not lying to you. That's thing number one. When you get past that hurdle, then you can talk about financials and legal documents and customer history and risk factors and all the other things that the HBR guide tells us to look for when we're buying a small business. So that's the first thing. But the second thing I would always talk about is working capital. The number one reason a business goes out of business is because of lack of cash. And you can have $1 million in accounts receivable, but until you convert that to cash, you're broke. And so you need to have a clear understanding of the cash conversion cycle. From the day you make a sale to the day that money actually hits your bank account after it's been cleared by the bank and you have access to that cash, to the day that you're actually paying that out to either employees or suppliers or vendors, or hopefully a distribution to yourself, you need to know the number of days that you have. Are you net 30, net 60, net 90? I mean, there was a point where I had $200,000 in accounts receivable that was 90 days in the rears. That doesn't help me when I'm paying payroll every 2 weeks. So understanding cash conversion cycle is the most important thing. If you're a small business owner and you've just acquired your business and you don't have, at the very minimum, an 8-week cash projection, then I don't know what to tell you. You don't understand what's happening in your business. you don't understand how cash is coming in and how cash is going out. So cash is key. If you understand your cash, then you can start having detailed conversations about how to spend that cash on ads or on trucks or on personnel. But if you don't know what your cash is, all this other information is pretty moot.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Great points. So I know we're kind of at the end of our scheduled time. We've got a question from Kevin, which that'll be fun to answer that question, because I know we'll all have some thoughts to share there. But Jed, just to double click for a second on what happened with you and the businesses that you bought. I think you've pointed to, publicly, I think you pointed to, essentially the fact that you had to shut them down was financial related. Is that accurate? What can you tell us about that?
That's right. So there's a lot of things that happened, some that were beyond my control, and definitely mistakes I made along the way. Ultimately, it came down to cash conversion cycle. I was working in a landscaping company where we were billing net 30. And so in reality, our customers were paying at net 45. Even when we started saying, hey, pay us on time or there's going to be a penalty, good luck. Because when you're taking over a customer base that has been used to paying in a certain format or fashion for decades, getting them to turn and do something differently is very, very difficult. So getting the money in the door is very difficult. The second part of that is that one of the things we look at when we're looking at buying business is, moving from an old economy to a new economy, moving from cash and check payments to digital payments. And all of that sounds really great until you actually have that conversation with a customer and say, hey, I want you to pay online. And they freak out. And they're like, oh, I can't do that. That looks like fraud. And I'm like, you guys just bought stuff on Amazon. You can pay me through a digital invoice. But at the time, 90% of our customers were paying by cash or check. And getting them to pay online through a digital invoice was a lift. It was a real hurdle. It's possible, but it's not going to happen in 30 or 60 days. It's going to take 6 to 12 months, and you can get there. But all those things really impacted our ability to take in cash. And at the same time, you're working in a highly capital intensive business where payroll is the biggest expense you have. And when I took over, payroll was operating weekly. And so having the conversation to move payroll to biweekly, that's tough. Employees don't like that. Like we talked about before, about you start messing with people's paychecks. And it became pretty clear within the first 8 weeks that if we didn't move to biweekly payroll, we weren't going to have a chance to survive. And so we had to make that move. And then beyond that, getting on good credit terms with your vendors, getting net 30 payment terms or better is really essential. So you can hold on to that cash a little bit longer and actually meet your current obligations while you're still getting that other income in the door. And so that's why I harp so big on cash conversion cycle and understanding your working capital, because if you run out of cash, it doesn't matter how many sales you make. You're out of business. The moment you don't make payroll, your employees walk off the job. And that's how it impacted us. So we were running pretty thin for the better part of 6 months. And we were starting to pull ourselves out of a hole and seeing things improving. Like every month, the cash on hand would go up by 5, 10, 20%. And so we were seeing some improvement there. But then, like you said, headwinds will come. And for us, that was our number 3 biggest customer decided not to pay. And that was huge. They had a lot of reasons why they didn't want to pay. None of them, were our fault. It's just their internal challenges, checks in the mail, all those types of things that you've heard a million times. But the point was that they didn't pay their bill. And at the same time, we had an insurance bill and 2 trucks break all at once, which had to be dealt with as payroll was happening. And it was a Friday when I realized that there's a really good chance we're not going to show up on Monday. And sure enough, Monday rolled around and we didn't have cash on hand and our employees walked off the job. And when you're in a service business, if your employees walk off the job, you're done. There's nothing left. You're not going to be able to convince them that you're going to be able to make that payroll again in the future when they've experienced all the struggle you've had up until that point. It's a small community. Your customers are going to find out fast and look for alternative suppliers and vendors to take care of their needs. And that's the other thing about this comment I saw, passive income. I see that thrown around a lot. When you're dealing with these businesses, business value is a combination of people and equipment and brand and the kind of service impact you can make. there's not a lot of tangible value there. There's not a lot of book value there. And even if you're running a business that would sell for $5 million and has $500,000 to $750,000 of cash flow, when you sell off all the physical assets, you're probably not even covering the cash flow of the business. So there's a lot of goodwill involved there. And this is why the whole concept of having a portfolio of small businesses is just one of the dumbest things I've heard in my life. This is not real estate. You know, when trouble hits the fan, there is not a sellable asset on the back end that is retained for you. There is no house, there's no property. It goes from $1 million to zero overnight, and there's nothing you can do about that. And so the idea that I'm going to acquire multiple small businesses, which by the way are the riskiest businesses in the world to acquire, and I'm going to simply put an operator in place who's going to run that for me, but I'm going to take all the financial risk of the personal guarantee, and I'm going to have 6 or 7 of those overall, and any one of them fails and it takes down my whole portfolio. You can see why I get passionate about this, and I started posting on LinkedIn about this, because there are a lot of gurus out there who are going to lie to you about what it really means to operate a small business, the kind of risk that it entails, and they're going to take the last few dollars that you have in your bank account to sell you a course on how you technically can do this, but in reality, you'll lose everything, including your house.
Yeah. Great points there, Jed. Let me just kind of put a bow on that, and then we can go to the final question. We'll wrap up. But cash flow is the number one reason that businesses fail of any size, right? And we have a client right now. They do 12 to 13 million in revenue, and I meet with them monthly, and every single meeting we talk about cash flow concerns. We talk about accounts receivable aging. We talk about all those types of things, because it actually gets worse. The larger your revenue numbers, the cash flow can actually get worse. And so if you don't have an eye on it and you don't understand how quickly you're converting cash, because this business has been around for a long time. I don't remember the exact numbers. I think they actually just celebrated their 20th anniversary this year. And guess what? To your point, Jed, they just switched from every other week payroll to bi-monthly, right? Because for that very reason, for cash flow. And it does become a concern for employees, and they had to deal with all of that. But from a cash flow perspective, they needed to do that, even though they've got over $1 million a month coming in revenue.
Yeah, that's the real world. It really does come down to cash flow and stepping in. And the last thing I'll say on this is that if you're buying in the lower middle market, SBA, and it's $5 million of transaction value or under, understand that you're an owner operator. Your job is to roll up your sleeves and get to work. And hopefully you can build yourself into a position where you can build out management and get to that dream world where you're, supervising the business and not actually working in the business. But until you get there, you need to understand that you are in the riskiest pool of small business ownership. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a good thing. The SBA is a great tool that you can use to acquire and move into that space. But have no illusions about it. Cash flow is your enemy. Like, you have to understand the cash conversion cycle of your business. You have to understand how that cash is moving through your business. And one of the things that the HBR guide tells us to do is to buy a business that's enduringly profitable and hopefully not touch it for the first 12 months and not break anything. I would challenge you as the new business owner to understand that you're the one who took the personal guarantee. It is all on you. No one's coming to save you. And if you feel like something needs to change, get in there and change it. Like, you need to be able to be decisive and make the actions that are required to keep your business alive. Because if you decide to be hands off, you will absolutely lose your business. And if it is going to crash, I would rather have it crash knowing I did everything I could with the knowledge and experience I had at the time to have the best outcome possible than, stand back and be scared. Like, it is you. No one else is going to help you there. So step in and do the work. And, it's an ownership thing. And you just don't understand it until you're in the seat.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap the main portion of the presentation. So Landon, you want to hit that question real quick, and we'll let people get on with their day?
Yeah, I think Jed kind of addressed the whole passive side of things. I mean, is it possible? Yes. Is it realistic for the vast majority of people out there? Absolutely not, especially if you have no SMB experience as an operator. it's just if there's 10 puzzle pieces to this, every single piece of that puzzle has to come together perfectly for that situation to play out to where it's passive. Are there stories about guys or gals that buy a business as a side hustle, and while working, continuing to work their full-time job? Like, yeah, sure. But, people also claim to see Bigfoot. Do we know if he's real or not? I mean, I don't know. So it's not realistic for that to actually transpire and play out for most people. If you have experience running a business for many, many years, and you've got experience in sales and marketing and operations and finance and hiring and firing and all these things, like, can you buy a business and partner with an operator to have them run that business? Like, absolutely you can. Can you do that with having no SMB prior experience? Highly, highly unlikely that you are going to do that successfully.
Yeah. Oh, Jed, you're on mute, so I'll jump in first. I think the it is possible, right? But the better route, to Jed's point earlier and to your point there, Landon, is if you're making the transition, be fully committed, but rather than holding on to your job and trying to make it work, save up the money that you need to live for a year or 2 years or whatever, is appropriate for what you're buying, so that you can be fully committed to that business.
Yeah, and two things I'd throw onto that as well is one, understand that you're the one that has the responsibility. So are there stories of people doing, buying a business and putting an operator in place and it works out? Sure, that does work, but you need to have the experience in place already to understand, well, what happens when that operator takes a vacation or gets another job, or, any case, or you get to train someone else up. You have to be the person who steps in, because at the end of the day, everything we're discussing is a risk reward scenario. Taking on the risk of an SBA or in a PG is absolutely worth it when the numbers pan out and you're willing to step in and do the work. It's a great opportunity, but it's not worth it when you have other people doing the operations of the business day to day that are critical to that key man risk, but you're taking all the risk. That is absolutely a position you don't want to find yourself in. And the last thing I would say is that if you've never operated a small business before, I'm a firm believer in ETA, in small business operations, and I think it's a wonderful avenue for people to go down. But the reason I want to remind people, you need to make sure that the person you're taking advice from is a person coming from the position that you're in. And so there's a big difference between the Cody Sanchez's of the world who have millions of dollars and can afford their laundromat to go under, and somebody else who's got, they claim that they have 5 or 6 small businesses that are, each doing $1 million in revenue. And somehow that's turning into passive income, because it's not. That's not passive income. That is active income in every sense of the word, especially when you've got an operator in place and now that operator is gone and you have to, in the best case scenario, train up a new person to take over that position. So you're taking on the disproportionate risk. You're taking on the personal guarantee. And as someone who's been on the wrong side of a personal guarantee, I just really want to remind you that you're the one responsible for the debt.
Yeah, great way to end it. I do have to throw out that, the word influencer makes me throw up in my mouth a little bit every day. So just kind of be wary of that, or leery of that, leery, either one. That, what you see on social media is not always the reality.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, Jed, Austin, thank you guys. Brian and Luke, thanks for hanging out, guys. Thanks for the few people that joined on here. We certainly hope that it's valuable. Take some stuff away, and hit us up on LinkedIn if you got any follow-up questions, comments, or concerns. That's probably the easiest place to reach all of us. But have a great day, everybody, and till next time.